first heard about the cult from a friend at work. She spoke about it in hushed tones, as if afraid someone might overhear. But her excitement was palpable. The cult, she told me, promised eternal life. I was skeptical, of course. But there was something about the way she talked about it that made me curious. She gave me a card with an address and a time. Be there at midnight, she said. Don't be late. That night, I found myself standing outside an old warehouse. There was no sign indicating that this was the place, but I could feel a sense of foreboding in my bones. It was almost midnight, and the street was deserted except for a few stray cats. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should turn back. But then I saw a figure emerge from the shadows, beckoning me towards the warehouse. I recognized the long, flowing robes and the hood that concealed the face. It was one of them. I followed the figure inside, and was met with a scene straight out of a horror movie. The interior of the warehouse was decorated with strange symbols and artifacts. Candles flickered in the corners, casting eerie shadows on the walls. And in the center of the room stood a man, dressed in a crimson robe. His face was obscured by the hood, but I could feel his gaze upon me. "Welcome, my child," he said in a deep, gravelly voice. "You have come seeking eternal life, and we are here to give it to you." I felt a shiver run down my spine. But at the same time, there was a strange allure to his words. I had always been fascinated by the idea of immortality, and the prospect of achieving it was too tempting to ignore. The man beckoned me forward, and I stepped towards him. He handed me a chalice filled with a dark, viscous liquid. "Drink," he said, "and your journey will begin." I hesitated for a moment, wondering if this was a mistake. But then I remembered the promise of eternal life, and I took a sip of the liquid. As soon as the liquid touched my tongue, I felt a surge of energy coursing through my veins. It was like nothing I had ever experienced before. But at the same time, I felt a sense of unease creeping into my mind. Something was not right here. And then, as if on cue, the man in the crimson robe began to chant. The words were in a language I could not understand, but their meaning was unmistakable. This was a ritual, and I was a part of it. Suddenly, I felt a searing pain in my chest. It was as if my heart was being ripped out of my body. I screamed, but the sound was drowned out by the chanting. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it was over. The pain subsided, and I was left gasping for breath. The man in the crimson robe stepped towards me, a smile playing on his lips. "Welcome to the cult," he said. "You have just taken your first step towards eternal life." As the man in the crimson robe spoke, I tried to make sense of what had just happened. My chest still throbbed with pain, but it was fading quickly. The liquid I had ingested had given me a burst of energy, but now I felt a strange calmness settling over me. It was almost as if I was seeing things with a new clarity. The man gestured towards a group of people standing in the shadows. "These are your brothers and sisters," he said. "They have all come seeking the same thing as you. Together, we will journey towards eternal life." I looked at the faces of the people around me, and saw a mixture of fear and hope. There were young and old, men and women, all dressed in the same robes as the man in the crimson robe. They all looked at him with reverence, as if he was a god among mortals. But I couldn't shake off the feeling of unease. Something was not right here. The pain in my chest had subsided, but it had left behind a nagging suspicion that the cult was not what it seemed. I tried to rationalize it away. Maybe the pain had been a test to see if I was strong enough to join the cult. Maybe it was a necessary part of the journey towards eternal life. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The pain had been too real, too visceral. And the chanting, the symbols, the secrecy, it all added up to something that was far from reassuring. As if sensing my doubts, the man in the crimson robe turned towards me. "Do not be afraid," he said. "The journey towards eternal life is not an easy one. But with faith and dedication, we can achieve anything." His words sounded hollow to me. I could sense that there was something he wasn't telling me, something he was keeping hidden. And then, as if to confirm my suspicions, I saw a glint of something in his eyes. It was a look of greed, of hunger. He was not just a spiritual leader, he was a man with an agenda. I knew then that I had made a mistake by coming here. But it was too late now. I was a part of the cult, and there was no going back. The only thing I could do was to keep my wits about me, and try to find a way out before it was too late. The days that followed my initiation into the cult were filled with strange rituals and dark ceremonies. I was no longer an outsider, but a part of the inner circle, privy to the secrets that the cult kept hidden from the world. The man in the crimson robe, who called himself the High Priest, was always present, guiding us through the ceremonies with an unshakable conviction. The other members of the cult seemed to be under his thrall, never questioning his authority or his motives. At first, I tried to convince myself that what we were doing was harmless, that it was all just part of the journey towards eternal life. But as the days turned into weeks, and the ceremonies grew more intense, my doubts grew stronger. I watched as the cult performed unspeakable acts, using blood and fire to invoke ancient deities and summon dark powers. The High Priest led us through each ritual with a fervor that bordered on fanaticism. The other members of the cult seemed to revel in the darkness, their eyes alight with a feverish glow. But I felt like a prisoner, trapped in a world that I no longer recognized. The High Priest watched me closely, as if sensing my growing unease. He would often pull me aside and speak to me in hushed tones, promising me that the rewards of eternal life were worth any sacrifice. But I could see the desperation in his eyes, the hunger for power that drove him to commit unspeakable acts. And I knew that if I didn't find a way out soon, I would become just another sacrifice in his quest for immortality. One night, as we gathered around the fire to perform yet another ritual, I saw my chance. The High Priest was preoccupied, his attention focused on the flames. I slipped away from the group and made my way towards the edge of the clearing. But just as I was about to escape into the darkness, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned around to see the High Priest's eyes fixed on me, his face twisted with anger. "You cannot leave," he hissed. "You are one of us now, and you will stay here until the end." I tried to struggle free, but his grip was like iron. I knew then that I had only one chance left, to fight for my life, to break free from his hold and run as fast as I could into the unknown darkness. I ran as fast as I could through the woods, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear the High Priest and the other members of the cult shouting and cursing behind me, their footsteps pounding on the forest floor. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to get as far away from the cult as possible. I dodged branches and leapt over fallen logs, my mind racing with fear and adrenaline. As I ran, I could hear the High Priest's voice echoing through the woods. "You cannot escape us," he shouted. "You are ours now, and we will not let you go." But I refused to give up. I knew that if I stopped running, if I gave in to their threats, I would be lost forever. The night air was cold and damp, the stars obscured by a thick blanket of clouds. I could barely see where I was going, but I kept pushing forward, fueled by a desperate need to survive. Suddenly, I felt something brush against my leg, and I stumbled, nearly falling to the ground. I looked down and saw a gnarled root protruding from the earth, its twisted shape almost like a hand reaching out to grab me. I took a deep breath and forced myself to keep moving, even as I felt my strength waning. But just as I was about to give up, I saw a light in the distance, a small flicker of hope in the darkness. It was a cabin, its windows glowing with a warm light. Without thinking, I ran towards it, my legs pumping with renewed energy. I burst through the door, panting and gasping for air. The cabin was small and cramped, with a single room filled with a bed, a table, and a small wood stove. A woman was sitting at the table, her eyes widening in surprise at my sudden arrival. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice shaky. I don't have time to explain," I panted. "Please, you have to help me. I'm being chased by a cult. They want to kill me." The woman hesitated for a moment, her eyes flickering with fear. But then she nodded, as if making a decision. "All right," she said. "I'll help you. But we have to be quick." We worked together to barricade the door and windows, using whatever we could find to make it as secure as possible. The woman told me that she had fled to the cabin to escape her own demons, and had been living there alone for several months. As we finished securing the cabin, we heard a loud banging at the door. The high priest's voice echoed through the wooden planks. "Open up," he shouted. "We know you're in there. Give us the girl, and we'll let you live." The woman looked at me with wide eyes. "What do we do?" she whispered. I took a deep breath and prepared for the worst. We were trapped, with no way out. But I refused to go down without a fight. The banging at the door continued, growing louder and more insistent. I could hear the high priest and his followers shouting and cursing outside, their voices filled with rage and desperation. The woman and I huddled together in the middle of the room, our hearts pounding in our chests. I could feel the cold metal of a kitchen knife in my hand, ready to defend myself against whatever came through the door. Suddenly, the banging stopped, and there was a moment of eerie silence. The woman and I exchanged a wary glance, unsure of what was happening. Then, without warning, the door burst open, sending splinters of wood flying through the air. I lunged forward, brandishing my knife, but the high priest was too quick for me. He grabbed my arm and twisted it behind my back, forcing me to drop the knife. I screamed in pain as he dragged me towards the open door. The woman was screaming too, throwing whatever she could find at the cult members as they rushed into the cabin. But it was no use. They were too strong, too determined. I struggled against the high priest's grip, but he was like a vice, his fingers digging into my flesh. He dragged me outside, into the cold night air. The other members of the cult were waiting outside, their eyes wild with excitement. They formed a circle around us, their hands clasped together in a macabre dance. The high priest shoved me to the ground, and I felt a sharp pain in my head as it hit the hard earth. I looked up, dazed and disoriented, as he stood over me, a wicked smile on his face. "Welcome to your final initiation," he said. his voice low and menacing. "Tonight, you will join us in our eternal quest for life." I struggled to my feet, my head throbbing with pain. "No," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I won't do it. I won't become like you." The high priest laughed, a sound that echoed through the woods. "Oh, but you will," he said. "You have no choice. You are ours now, forever." I closed my eyes, steeling myself for whatever was to come. But then, I heard a sound that filled me with hope. It was the sound of sirens, growing louder and louder as they approached the cabin. The cult members faltered, their hands dropping to their sides as they looked around in confusion. The police had arrived, alerted by the woman in the cabin. They rushed towards us, their guns drawn, and the cult members scattered, disappearing into the darkness. I fell to my knees, tears streaming down my face. I had survived, but I knew that the nightmare was far from over. The high priest was still out there, somewhere, and he would stop at nothing to get me back. But for now, I was safe, and I would do whatever it took to stay that way. The police took us to the hospital to be checked over. I had a concussion and a few bruises, but otherwise, I was okay. The woman was in shock, but physically unharmed. As we waited for our statements to be taken, I couldn't help but replay the events of the night in my head. How had I been so foolish to join the cult in the first place? How had I not seen the warning signs sooner? I looked over at the woman, who was sitting next to me, her eyes glazed with tears. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry for getting you involved in all of this." She shook her head. "Don't be sorry. You saved my life. I'll never forget that." I smiled weakly at her, grateful for her words. But deep down, I knew that I was far from a hero. I had been weak, vulnerable, and had fallen into the trap of the cult all too easily. As the night wore on, the police took our statements and gathered evidence from the scene. The cabin was a mess, with broken furniture and bloodstains on the walls. The police found evidence of human sacrifice and other dark rituals, confirming what I had feared all along. The cult had been involved in unspeakable acts, and I had been lucky to escape with my life. Days turned into weeks, and the initial shock and fear began to fade. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that the high priest was still out there, waiting for his chance to strike. I moved to a new town, changed my name, and tried to start over. But the memories of the cult haunted me, and I knew that I would never be able to forget what had happened. Sometimes, I would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew that the cult was still out there, somewhere, and that I would never be truly safe. But I refused to let them control my life any longer. I had escaped their clutches once, and I would do it again if I had to. I would never forget the lessons I had learned, and I would never let myself fall prey to a cult again. The memories of the cult would always be a part of me, but I was determined to move forward, to live my life to the fullest, and to never forget the power of my own strength and resilience. Years passed, and I thought I had finally put the cult behind me. I had built a new life for myself, surrounded by loving friends and family, and had even started a successful business. But deep down, I knew that I would never be truly free of the haunting memories of my time with the cult. One day, out of the blue, I received a package in the mail. It was a small box, wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. My heart raced as I opened it, and inside, I found a letter. My hands shook as I unfolded the paper, and I recognized the familiar scrawl of the high priest's handwriting. "Dear, my name." The letter began. "I hope this finds you well. I know it has been many years since we last spoke, but I felt compelled to reach out to you. I wanted to offer my sincerest apologies for any pain or harm that the cult may have caused you. I know that I can never truly make amends for my actions, but I wanted you to know that I have found peace and redemption in my life, and I hope that you can find it in your heart to forgive me." I felt a wave of emotions wash over me as I read the letter. Anger, fear, and resentment mixed with a small spark of hope. Could it be true? Could the man who had led the cult, the man who had tried to sacrifice me, really have found redemption? I took a deep breath and wrote a reply, thanking him for his letter and expressing my skepticism. He responded quickly, inviting me to meet with him in person, to talk things out and to find closure. Part of me was hesitant, but another part of me felt that I needed to confront my past head-on, to find the closure that had eluded me for so long. I agreed to the meeting and drove out to the old cabin where I had once been held captive. The high priest was waiting for me there, looking older and grayer than I remembered. We talked for hours, hashing out the details of what had happened all those years ago. He apologized again and again, and I could see the genuine remorse in his eyes. Finally, as the sun began to set, I knew that it was time to say goodbye. I extended my hand to him, and he took it, his grip firm and steady. "I forgive you," I said, my voice steady, "for everything that happened with the cult. I hope that you can find peace and redemption in your life." He nodded, his eyes filling with tears. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for giving me a chance to make things right." As I drove away from the cabin, I felt a sense of closure that I had never thought possible. The memories of the cult would always be a part of me, but I knew that I had finally found the strength to move forward, to leave the past behind, and to embrace the future with open arms. Despite the closure that meeting with the high priest had brought me, the aftermath of the cult's influence lingered in my life. Nightmares haunted me, and I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, afraid that someone from the cult might come after me. My business began to suffer as well. The stress of reliving my trauma and trying to move past it took its toll, and I found it difficult to focus on anything else. My friends and family tried to be supportive, but they couldn't fully understand the depth of my pain and fear. One day, I received a call from an old friend from the cult. She had also left the group, and we had lost touch over the years. She invited me to meet her for coffee, and I accepted, grateful for the chance to talk to someone who had been through a similar experience. As we sipped our drinks, she told me about her own struggles since leaving the cult. She had been plagued by nightmares and fear, just like me. But she had also found a support group, a network of people who had all left cults and were working together to heal and move forward. She encouraged me to join the group, and I hesitated at first, afraid of reliving my trauma yet again. But she assured me that it was a safe space, a place where I could share my story and receive support from people who truly understood. I decided to give it a try, and it was one of the best decisions I ever made. The group was made up of people from all walks of life, all with their own stories of escaping cults and finding their way back to themselves. Together, we worked through our trauma and learned to trust again. We shared our stories, our pain, and our hope for the future. Years have passed since then, and I am now a mentor in the support group. helping others who are struggling to leave behind the trauma of their past. I have found peace and redemption, not just for myself, but for others as well. The memories of the cult will always be a part of me, but they no longer control me. I am free, and I will never forget the strength and resilience that it took to get here. It's been years since I left the cult, and I am finally at a place where I can say I am truly happy. The nightmares and fears that once consumed me have faded into the background, replaced by a sense of purpose and fulfillment. I have built a life for myself, one that is filled with love, laughter, and the joy of helping others. The support group that I joined all those years ago is still a huge part of my life. We have all come a long way since our first meeting, and it is amazing to see the progress that we have all made together. But even more than that, I have found a way to turn my experience with the cult into something positive. I have written a book about my journey, detailing the steps that I took to leave the group and the struggles that I faced in the aftermath. It was a difficult process, reliving those memories and putting them down on paper. But it was also cathartic, a way for me to fully process what had happened and to help others who may be going through similar experiences. The response to the book has been overwhelming, and I have been touched by the messages from readers who have found hope and inspiration in my story. I have even started giving talks and leading workshops on cult recovery, using my own experiences to help others who are struggling to find their way back to themselves. It's not always easy, and there are still days when I feel the weight of the cult's influence on my life. But I have learned that I am stronger than I ever thought possible, and that the support and love of others can make all the difference. Looking back on my journey, I realized that leaving the cult was just the beginning. It was a difficult and painful process, but it opened up a world of possibility and growth. I am grateful for every step of the journey, even the darkest moments, because they have brought me to where I am today. And I am excited to see where the path leads me next, knowing that I have the strength and resilience to face whatever comes my way.